The fabricated rain fell in slick, synthetic sheets, plastering discarded broadsheets to the cracked ferrocrete of Sim District 9. Kexthal tasted the ozone tang of the simulation's air, a deliberate and artful touch designed to mimic a decaying world's atmosphere. He flexed his 4 hands, the talons on each clicking softly. The lower pair gripped the stock and formed of his kinetic pulse rifle, a weapon of brutal efficiency. His upper pair remained free, ready to scale a wall or snap a neck with equal ease. Through his multi-spectrum visor, the gloom-drenched city was a tapestry of heat signatures and faint electronic ghosts. He was a predator in his element, a perfect hunter unleashed in a target-rich environment. His people, the Xylos, were the undisputed masters of physical conflict. Their society was a grand, unyielding pyramid built on the foundation of martial prowess. To be Xylos was to be a warrior, and to be a warrior was to seek glory in conquest. Kexthal was not just a warrior. He was an apex hunter, a title earned through 100 trials and the ritual slaying of his world's most formidable beasts. Now, his prowess was being tested against a new, much-vaunted quarry. The bipeds known as humans. The War Council had been debating the human question for cycles. Scans of their worlds revealed a species technologically adolescent, yet expanding with a startling, weed-like tenacity. They were fragile, soft-fleshed things, reliant on crude projectile weapons and clumsy armor. An initial probe had been met with a surprisingly coordinated, if primitive, defense. This had intrigued the Council. Were they cunning prey? Did they offer a worthy hunt? This simulation was the answer. It was designed to measure the tactical effectiveness of a single apex hunter against a squad of their best simulated soldiers. A flicker of movement, 200 meters down the main thoroughfare. 3 heat signatures huddled behind the rusted shell of a ground vehicle. They were clustered, a fatal error, a novice's mistake. Kexthal's mandibles parted in a silent expression of contempt. He slithered from his perch on the 3rd story of a derelict hab block, his grav dampeners silencing his descent to a mere whisper of displaced air. He moved through the rubble-strewn alleyways, his movements a fluid dance of lethality. His olfactory sensors picked up their scent signatures, a complex cocktail of sweat, damp textiles, and the faint, coppery tang of fear. The simulation was impressively detailed. He positioned himself behind a collapsed wall, peering through a gap. The 3 humans were speaking in hushed, anxious tones, their language a series of soft, guttural sounds that his translator implant rendered as panicked nonsense. One clutched a long rifle, its form laughably antiquated. Another held a small, glowing datapad. The 3rd just shivered, rubbing his arms. Prey, frightened and weak. Kexthal didn't believe in protracted engagements with inferior foes. That was not honor, it was playing with one's food. He adjusted the setting on his rifle to a wide-burst kinetic pulse. He rose, leveled the weapon, and fired. The air cracked with a sound like tearing reality. The pulse, invisible to the naked eye, struck the rusted vehicle. It didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing in on itself with a deafening groan of tortured metal, dragging the 3 humans with it into a compressed, misshapen tomb of steel. No screams. No final, defiant shots. Just an abrupt and total cessation of life. He scanned the area, 3 signatures extinguished. The efficiency was beautiful, pure. He felt the familiar surge, the cold fire of dominance that came with a clean kill. This was the truth of the universe, a truth the Xylos had long ago mastered. The strong rule and the weak are erased. These humans, for all their supposed tenacity, were nothing. Their technology was a joke, their tactics pathetic. He moved on, the rain washing the memory of the kill away, leaving only the clean slate of the hunt. His next target was a sniper, nested in the spire of a pre-collapse corporate tower. This required more finesse. The direct approach was suicidal even against a primitive. Kexthal activated his chameleonic cloak, his chitinous hide shimmering before blending almost perfectly with the grimy cityscape. He scaled the tower's exterior, his talons finding purchase in the weathered facade. The wind howled around him, but he was a creature of singular focus. He reached the sniper's perch, a shattered pane of plasteel overlooking the square below. The human was prone, his eye pressed to a scope, utterly oblivious. Kexthal watched him for a long moment, studying the soft, vulnerable curve of his neck, the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. There was no muscle, no hardened carapace, just skin. It was an anatomical insult. He unslung his rifle, but then reconsidered. A weapon was for a worthy opponent. This was pest control. He crept into the room, his 4 feet making no sound. The human tensed, perhaps sensing a change in air pressure, and began to turn. It was too late. Kexthal's upper left hand shot out, grabbing the man's head. His upper right hand seized the chin. There was a sharp, wet crack that echoed in the small space. The heat signature vanished instantly. Kexthal let the limp body fall to the floor. He looked down at it, at the slack-jawed expression of surprise frozen on its face. He felt nothing but a distant, intellectual satisfaction. The simulation's parameters suggested there was one target left. The commander, finding him was simple. The simulation's designers had made the commander the most cautious, and therefore the most isolated. He had burrowed into a sub-level maintenance tunnel, surrounded by fail-safe blast doors. A fortress for a coward. Kexthal used a low-yield plasma charge to melt through the primary lock, the molten metal dripping like wax. He stalked the darkened corridors, his multi-spectrum vision cutting through the blackness. He found the commander in a small control room, frantically tapping at a console. When Kexthal entered, the man spun around, a small, ineffective sidearm in his trembling hand. He fired once. The projectile sparked harmlessly off Kexthal's thoracic plating. "Please," the human stammered, his words crisp and clear through the translator. We can surrender." Kexthal stepped closer, the sheer size of him filling the room. He let the human see him, truly see him. He saw the utter, soul-deep terror in the man's eyes. It was intoxicating. This was the natural order. This was the pinnacle of existence. Kind knows nothing of surrender. Kexthal's own voice rumbled through his external vocoder, a deep, resonant bass. Only defeat. He didn't bother with a weapon. He reached out with one of his lower hands and closed it around the human's throat. He lifted the man off the floor, enjoying the frantic, useless kicking, the gurgling sounds of a life being squeezed out. He held him there until the struggles ceased, until the last flicker of terrified life left his eyes. He dropped the body. It hit the floor with a soft, final thud. A chime echoed in his mind. Objective complete. All targets neutralized. Stand by for extraction. Kexthal stood over the final body, his chest swelling with pride. He had proven what he knew all along. The Xylos were masters, the humans were prey. The simulation had been a resounding, exhilarating success. He had achieved the ultimate hunt, a flawless demonstration of Xylo's superiority. He closed his eyes, savoring the rush of total domination, and waited for the familiar sensation of the simulation dissolving around him. The rain continued to fall. Kexthal remained in the commander's small, dark room, the dead human at his feet. The extraction chime had sounded, yet the simulation persisted. He opened his eyes, a flicker of annoyance breaking through his triumphant haze. Delays were inefficient. He accessed his internal chronometer. 3 minutes had passed since the completion signal. Unacceptable, he activated his comms link to the simulation overseer. Apex Hunter Kexthal reporting. Objective complete. I am awaiting extraction. Acknowledge. Static, he tried again. Overseer, this is Kexthal. The trial is concluded. Terminate the simulation. More static, this time punctuated by a low crackle that sounded less like interference and more like something organic. He frowned, his mandibles tightening. He ran a diagnostic on his comms system. Functional. The problem was not on his end. His gaze fell upon the body of the commander. He knelt, his analytical mind taking over from the triumphant warrior. He ran a gloved talon over the fabric of the man's uniform. The texture was rough, fibrous, more complex than the usual tactile feedback of a simulation. He leaned closer, activating his olfactory sensors at maximum sensitivity. Beneath the scent of sweat and fear, there was another smell, one his processors struggled to identify. It was the faint, cloying sweetness of genuine, decaying cellular matter. Not a programmed scent profile, but the real thing. He dismissed it. A high-fidelity simulation, of course. The War Council must have spared no expense to make this feel authentic. It was a testament to their dedication. A test worthy of an apex hunter required the finest verisimilitude. He stood up, his arrogance a comforting shield against the burgeoning unease. He decided to review his performance data while he waited. His visor's playback function activated, replaying the engagement from his own perspective. He watched the implosion of the ground vehicle, the clean snap of the sniper's neck. Perfect. Flawless. But as he replayed the moment he dispatched the first 3 targets, he noticed something. A single frame, lasting less than 1/100th of a second. As the vehicle collapsed, a spray of liquid had arced through the air. In the playback, he isolated it, zooming in. The simulation's standard rendering for blood was a generic crimson liquid. This was different. It was dark, almost black in the dim light, and it contained smaller, lighter-colored flecks, platelets, clotting agents. A level of biological detail so superfluous, so computationally expensive, it bordered on absurd. Why would the programmers bother with such a minute detail? One that no warrior in the heat of battle would ever notice. He felt a prickle of something cold and unfamiliar run down his spinal column. Doubt. He pushed it away. It was a flaw in the programming, nothing more. A glitch. Even the most advanced systems had them. He was letting the delay get to him, allowing his mind to invent phantoms. He paced the small room, the silence now feeling less like the end of a trial and more like a held breath. He looked at the console the commander had been using. It was still active. On a whim, he interfaced with it, his neural link easily bypassing the primitive human security. He expected to find simulation architecture, lines of code defining the parameters of his hunt. Instead, he found personnel files, names, birth dates, medical histories, psychological evaluations. He saw the file for the man at his feet. Commander Julian Carmichael, 47 standard years old, a wife and 2 children, a commendation for bravery during the Orion border skirmishes. It was all there. A complete life meticulously documented, Kexthal's 4 hands clenched into fists. This was excessive, a ludicrous level of backstory for a mere program. Why create such elaborate fictions? To enhance the hunter's satisfaction. It felt perverse. He delved deeper, pulling up the files for the other targets. The sniper, Sergeant Eva Rostova, a prodigy marksman with a penchant for classical music. The 3 soldiers by the vehicle. Rookies fresh from training, their psychological profiles filled with a mixture of eagerness and anxiety. His mind raced, trying to fit these puzzle pieces into a shape that made sense. The lingering scent of decay, the hyperrealistic blood spatter, the impossibly detailed personnel files, the silence from the overseer. He looked at his own hands, then back at the body of Commander Carmichael. He remembered the feeling of the man's throat collapsing under his grip. The wet, organic crunch. It hadn't felt like a simulation's haptic feedback. It had felt real, an icy dread, far colder and more profound than any fear he had ever known in combat, began to crystallize in his gut. The arrogance that had fueled him for the past hour began to crumble, sand turning to glass under an intense, horrifying heat. He was Kexthal, an apex hunter of the Xylos. He was a master of the physical realm, a conqueror. Such beings were not deceived. They were not made fools of. He refused to believe it. It was a final test, a psychological trial to see if he would break under pressure. Yes, that had to be it. A clever, layered deception to test his mental fortitude. He was still in the game. He was still in control. End simulation. Now, he roared, his voice booming in the confined space. I have passed your test. I see the deception. This trial is over. The only response was the soft, persistent hum of the console and the patter of the rain outside, a sound that no longer felt synthetic. He stood there, shouting into the void, a titan of the battlefield suddenly lost and terrified in the silence that followed. He looked down at the corpse, at the very real, very empty eyes of Julian Carmichael, and for the first time in his life, Kexthal felt the chilling possibility that he had not been the hunter at all. He had been the tool. The rain did not stop. It simply vanished. The sound, the scent, the sensation of moisture all ceased in an instant. The perpetually gray, overcast sky above Sim District 9 flickered, then resolved into a grid of sterile white lighting panels. The illusion shattered. Kexthal watched, frozen, as the ruined buildings around him, the hab block he'd perched on, the corporate spire, the rubble-strewn streets, revealed themselves to be hyperrealistic solid-light projections. They wavered, became translucent, and then dissolved into nothingness, leaving him standing on a vast, circular metal stage. The stage itself was real. The collapsed vehicle was real. The 5 bodies were real. They lay scattered across the polished floor, stark and undeniable under the sudden, brilliant light. The smell of blood and voided bowels was no longer a subtle note. It was a thick, cloying miasma. A section of the circular wall slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a corridor that was as clean and white as the lighting above. A figure emerged, walking with a calm, unhurried gait. It was a human, but it was not a soldier. It was a female, small and slender, dressed in a simple, dark gray tunic and trousers that seemed more suited for a laboratory than a battlefield. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and her face was composed, her expression one of mild, academic curiosity. She held no weapon. She wore no armor. She stopped about 30 feet away, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Kexthal's combat instincts screamed. He raised his pulse rifle, its targeting laser painting a red dot on her chest. "Identify yourself. What is the meaning of this? Where are the overseers?" His voice thundered, amplified by the vast, empty space. The woman's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "The overseers?" she said, her voice calm and clear, requiring no amplification to reach him. His translator rendered it perfectly. "There are no overseers, Kexthal. There is only management." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "I am Dr. Sarah Chen. And the simulation, as you call it, concluded 102 minutes ago with the death of Commander Carmichael. Welcome to the debriefing." The word debriefing struck him like a physical blow. It was a word of process, of analysis, not of games or trials. His rifle did not waver, but uncertainty flooded his mind. This was a sanctioned Xylos military trial, an evaluation. "I demand to speak with my war council." "Are not in a position to demand anything," Dr. Chen stated, her tone still maddeningly placid. "And this was not your trial. It was ours." Rage, pure and hot, burned through Kexthal's confusion. "Lies, I destroyed your soldiers, I hunted them down and broke them. Your species is weak, pathetic. This entire exercise proved it. Did it?" Chen tilted her head slightly, a gesture of thoughtful inquiry. "You killed 5 people, yes, very efficiently I might add, but they were not soldiers." Sergeant Rostova was a musician who volunteered. The 3 men by the vehicle were logistics clerks who believed they were participating in a disaster relief drill. And Commander Carmichael was a retired cartographer who was told he was helping us test new virtual reality interfaces. Kexthal's lower hands, the ones holding the rifle, began to tremble. A cold sweat, thick and oily, beaded on his carapace. "No, they fought back. The sniper, the commander." "We gave them props, Kexthal," Chen said, her voice laced with something that sounded like pity. "We told them it was part of the test. To react as they thought a soldier might. We gave them non-functional weapons and a script. You, on the other hand, you had a fully functional kinetic pulse rifle." She gestured to the bodies. "Those were not programs, Apex Hunter. They were civilians, they were parents and siblings and friends, and you murdered them." Rifle suddenly felt immensely heavy. Kexthal stared at the small woman, then at the bodies, his mind frantically trying to reject her words. It was a trick. A human trick. They were liars, deceivers. "You lie, it was a simulation. I saw the code, the parameters." "You saw what we wanted you to see," Chen replied smoothly. "A carefully constructed data shell. A fiction fed directly to your neural interface. You never questioned why you, an apex hunter, were being tested against a species you already held in utter contempt. You never wondered why the parameters were so perfectly skewed in your favor. Your pride, Kexthal, made you the most reliable variable in the entire experiment." The truth hit him then, not as a dawning realization, but as a catastrophic system failure. The anomalies, his dismissal of them, his arrogance, it all clicked into place. He hadn't been an apex hunter demonstrating his superiority. He had been a lab rat, running a maze of his own hubris, with a piece of cheese at the end that turned out to be poison. He had been manipulated, played, and turned into a butcher of innocence while he preened and postured, believing it was a game. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was beyond anything his warrior mind could fathom. He let out a roar of fury and anguish, a sound of a god discovering it was nothing but a puppet, and lunged at her. He didn't make it 2 steps. A low hum vibrated through the floor, and a shimmering barrier of pure energy erupted between them. Kexthal slammed into it with the force of a battering ram. The impact sent a paralyzing shockwave through his entire body. His muscles locked, his rifle clattered to the floor, and he collapsed, twitching and spasming, his vision filled with strobing lights. He was completely helpless, a beached leviathan gasping on the shore of his own broken pride. Dr. Chen walked forward until she stood just on the other side of the humming barrier, looking down at his pathetic, writhing form. Her expression had not changed. It was still one of calm, detached observation. "The physical portion of the debriefing," she said, her voice a soft, final judgment, "is now complete." Lay on the cold metal floor, the last of the paralytic energy receding, leaving behind a profound, boneless weakness. His limbs felt like they belonged to another being. He managed to push himself up, resting on his lower elbows, his magnificent chitinous body now feeling like a clumsy, oversized prison. His pulse rifle lay a few feet away, inert and useless. The energy barrier had vanished. There was nothing stopping him from reaching her, yet the thought of another attack was unthinkable. The futility of it was a crushing weight. Doctor. Chen had pulled a small, semi-translucent device from her pocket and was observing him, not as a warrior observes a defeated foe, but as a biologist observes a specimen under a microscope. "Why?" Kexthal rasped, his vocoder barely able to form the word. The rage was gone, burned out and replaced by a hollow, cavernous bewilderment. "That is an excellent question," Chen said, her tone approving, as if he were a student who had finally grasped a difficult concept. "Most subjects in your position would continue with threats and bluster. Your species is remarkably predictable in that regard." She tapped the device, and a large holographic screen materialized in the air beside her. It showed a complex branching diagram of what looked like a neural network. It was pulsing with light. Kexthal recognized the patterns. It was a Xylo's psychological profile. His psychological profile. "We have been studying your species for a very long time, Kexthal. While you were studying our primitive weapons and fragile bodies, we were studying your honor codes, your social structures, your neurochemistry. We learned that the Xylo's psyche is built upon a single, load-bearing pillar, the conviction of physical and martial superiority. Your art, your politics, your individual sense of self-worth, it all stems from this. You believe the most powerful weapon is the one you can hold in your hands." She pointed to a glowing node on the diagram. "This is your pride, your hubris. It is, from a strategic standpoint, not a strength but a critical design flaw. An exposed thermal exhaust port, to use a metaphor from one of our older fictions. We did not need to defeat you in battle. We only needed to target this. We designed this entire scenario, what you called the simulation, specifically for you. We studied your combat records, your personal history, your commendations. We knew you wouldn't question an opportunity to prove your dominance. We knew you would be so drunk on the feeling of victory that you would ignore any and all inconsistencies. You performed exactly as your profile predicted." Stared at the hologram, at the clinical, precise map of his own soul laid bare. Every decision he had made in the arena, every surge of contempt and pride had been anticipated, accounted for, and exploited. "You couldn't defeat our war council on the field," he snarled, a desperate, final attempt to cling to the wreckage of his worldview. "So you resort to these dishonorable tricks." "Dishonorable?" Chen raised an eyebrow. "Is it dishonorable for a river to wear down a mountain? We simply operate on a different timescale and with a different understanding of what a battlefield is. You see this room, I see a chessboard." She swiped the device and the hologram changed. It now showed a view of the arena, but from a dozen different angles simultaneously. Tiny, near-invisible drones had captured everything. "We have recorded your performance," she said, the slight pause before the word performance dripping with ice. "Every kill, every boastful word spoken into your comms. We have footage of you savoring the fear of unarmed civilians. We have a complete record of an apex hunter of the Xylos, a celebrated champion of your people, murdering 5 non-combatants for sport, believing it to be a game." The blood in Kexthal's veins turned to ice. He understood the implication immediately. This footage, Chen continued, her voice a scalpel, is currently being prepared for dissemination. We can send it to the Galactic Concordiat. The Xylos's recent application for protectorate status would be complicated by evidence of them using sentient beings for live-fire target practice. Or perhaps we could send it to the Cathar Imperium. They already view you as brutish upstarts. This would confirm their biases and likely trigger a preemptive war. A war your people would lose badly. She paused, letting the strategic nightmare unfold in his mind. Then she delivered the final, most devastating blow. My personal favorite option, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is to leak it to the lower castes of your own society. The workers, the builders, the technicians. The millions who toil to support the glorious warrior class. How would they feel, I wonder, seeing one of their greatest heroes, a symbol of their species' strength, reduced to a pawn in a human experiment? Seeing their champion manipulated, controlled, and made to dance like a puppet on a string, your pillar of martial superiority would not just crack, it would shatter. Your entire social order would collapse into civil war, not from an external attack, but from the simple, corrosive power of shame. Finally understood. True dominance wasn't about snapping necks or firing pulse rifles. It was about this cold, effortless, absolute control. It was about holding a razor blade to the throat of an entire civilization and making its own champion the one who guided your hand. He had walked into that arena thinking he was the judge, jury, and executioner. Now he saw that he was merely the evidence for the prosecution, Exhibit A in a trial against his entire species, and he had delivered the guilty verdict himself. His weapons were useless here. His strength was a liability. His honor was a joke. He was, in every meaningful way, utterly and completely disarmed. Kexthal's mind, once a fortress of unwavering certainty, was now a city in ruins. The revelations did not come like hammer blows, but like a slow, rising tide of acid, dissolving every foundation he had ever built his identity upon. The universe, as he knew it, had been a lie. A children's story he had told himself, and his entire species had believed it. You cannot, he stammered, the words catching in his throat. The sheer scale of the deception was incomprehensible. It was one thing to be tricked. It was another to realize the trick was merely a single move in a game so vast it spanned the stars. Dr. Chen seemed to read his thoughts. Her expression softened, but it was not with empathy. It was the look of a teacher patiently waiting for a slow student to catch up. She swiped the holographic display again. The image of Kexthal's humiliation vanished, replaced by a swirling, three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Countless star systems were marked, connected by intricate, pulsing lines of light. You think this is about you, Kexthal? She asked softly. About the Xylos, you are a footnote, a single, if illustrative, case study. What we did to you today is not a new strategy. It is our oldest one. She gestured to a prominent nebula on the map, a region controlled by the G-Vorn hegemony. The G-Vorn were a species of silicon-based giants, their fleets legendary, their warships mountains of living crystal that could shatter planets. The G-Vorn, Chen said, pride themselves on their unassailable economy, a monolithic system based on the trade of exotic crystals. 10 years ago, a team of 3 human economists, posing as itinerant traders, introduced a single, self-replicating algorithm into their deep market networks. It wasn't a virus. It didn't steal or destroy. It simply made infinitesimal, statistically invisible adjustments to resource valuations over time. Last year, the algorithm reached its programmed cascade point. The G-Vorn economy did not crash. It evaporated in the space of a single trade cycle. Their entire currency is now worthless. Their fleets are grounded for lack of funds. They are currently experiencing a famine. We defeated the greatest armada in this galactic arm without firing a single shot. We did it with mathematics. Her finger traced another line to a different cluster of stars, home to the Kaltori, a species of telepaths who communicated in a collective consciousness. They were considered gods by their neighbors. The Kaltori believed their great consciousness was inviolable, a pure psychic truth. Our xenopsychologists found that, like any network, it could be hacked. We didn't use technology. We used a story, a myth. We seeded a carefully crafted prophecy into the dreams of a few dozen of their mystics. a prophecy that subtly reinterpreted their most sacred texts, painting a rival faction within their own society as a prophesied corruption. It took 2 generations to mature. The Kaltore are now locked in a brutal civil war, a holy crusade against themselves, fueled by a narrative we wrote for them. Their psychic screams are tearing apart their own star systems. She zoomed out, and dozens of other examples lit up across the map. The hulking brute lords of Cygnus X1, engineered into docile servitors through tailored retroviruses that targeted aggression-linked genes. The hyper-advanced machine intelligence of the Cygnax confluence fed a logical paradox so profound it induced a system-wide recursive loop, effectively putting the entire civilization into a coma. "We don't conquer, Kexthal," Chen explained, her voice as steady and relentless as a glacier. "Conquest is messy, expensive, and temporary. It creates martyrs and legends of defiance. We don't need to do that. We integrate, we study. We find the core principle of a society, the single idea upon which it is built, your martial pride, the G-Vorn's wealth, the Kaltore's faith, and we turn it into a weapon against them. We help them dismantle themselves. It's cleaner, more permanent." Finally saw it. He finally understood the chilling truth behind humanity's unassuming facade. They weren't an adolescent species stumbling into space. They were the galaxy's silent, patient gardeners pruning and shaping civilizations to their will. Their perceived weakness, their fragile bodies, their reliance on tools was their greatest camouflage. While other species like the Xylos were honing their claws and sharpening their spears, humanity had been mastering the art of puppetry. They didn't need to be stronger, faster, or tougher. Why build a better sword when you can convince your enemy to fall upon his own? "You hunt individuals," Chen said, bringing the lesson to its devastating conclusion. "We hunt civilizations, and we have been doing this for a very, very long time. You are the apex predators of your world, Kexthal. We are the apex predators of the universe. The only difference is that our prey rarely knows it is being hunted until it is already skinned, butchered, and stored for winter." The holographic map faded, leaving Kexthal alone again in the stark white room with the 5 bodies, and the woman who had just dissected his entire reality. The full scope of human dominance was not a military fact, it was a philosophical one. It was a truth so absolute and terrifying that it dwarfed any concept of honor or strength he had ever known. He was less than an insect. He was a bacterium on a slide, and humanity was the eye looking through the lens. Kexthal did not move. He couldn't. His body was functional, but his spirit, his very essence, had been hollowed out. The Xylos warrior within him was dead. It had been killed not by a plasma blast or a sharp blade, but by a series of calmly spoken sentences. He was a shell, an empty carapace filled with the ashes of his former self, Doctor. Chen walked around the spot where the barrier had been and stood before him. She looked down, her gaze unwavering. "So, we come to your debriefing, Apex Hunter. You have 2 paths, both are forms of servitude. The only difference is the degree of your species' awareness." She knelt, bringing herself closer to his eye level. The gesture was not one of compassion but of clinical intimacy, like a doctor preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "Path 1, she began, her voice low and precise. "You refuse to cooperate. We release the data. All of it. The footage of your hunt goes to the Concordiat, embarrassing your people on a galactic stage. The analysis of your psychological vulnerabilities goes to your rivals, giving them a perfect blueprint for how to defeat you. And the story of how your greatest champion was so easily played goes to your lower castes, igniting the fires of a revolution that will burn your civilization to the ground. Your name, Kexthal, will be synonymous with shame and ruin. You will be the traitor who brought down the Xylos not through malice but through pathetic, predictable pride." She let him absorb the horror of that legacy, a fate worse than 1,000 deaths for any Xylos warrior. "Or," she continued, "there is path 2. You cooperate. The data is buried. The 5 deaths here are recorded as a tragic accident during a joint technology exchange, an exchange you will personally help us negotiate. You will return to your people as a hero, the warrior who faced the human simulation and emerged victorious, bringing back invaluable intelligence. They will celebrate you. They will elevate you to the War Council. Your voice will carry immense weight. stared at her, the terrible shape of the second path forming in his mind. And from that position, Chen confirmed his unspoken fear, "You will serve us. You will be our agent. When the council debates expanding into a territory we have claimed, you will advise caution. When they consider an alliance that threatens our interests, you will find flaws in the proposal. You will steer your people's destiny, subtly and invisibly, onto a course of our choosing. You will become the architect of their peaceful, willing subjugation. You will personally neuter your own species from the inside, and they will shower you with honors for it. You will live out your days as a celebrated hero, knowing that you are the greatest traitor your people have ever known." There it was, the choice. Annihilation with shame or a life of gilded dishonor, death to his people or death to his soul. It wasn't a choice at all. It was the final, perfect expression of human dominance. They had not only defeated him, they had rewritten his very purpose. He was no longer a hunter. He was a tool. A sound escaped Kexthal's mandibles. It was a low, chittering click, a sound of absolute deference a Xylo's drone makes to its queen. It was the sound of total submission. His magnificent warrior's body, built for conquest and glory, slumped forward until his head touched the cold floor. The surrender was absolute, a psychological implosion so complete that no trace of the former apex hunter remained. He looked up at Dr. Sarah Chen, the small, soft-fleshed biped who had conquered him without raising her voice. He saw not a person but a force of nature, an intelligence so far beyond his own that it might as well have been divine. He was a spear, and he had just met the hand that could wield gravity itself. "I will serve," Kexthal whispered, his voice broken. "Doctor." Chen's face remained placid, but for the first time a flicker of something new appeared in her eyes. It wasn't triumph. It was satisfaction. The satisfaction of a complex equation resolving perfectly. "Good," she said, standing up and brushing an imaginary piece of dust from her tunic. "Your re-education begins now. We have much work to do."